After the announcement of the Ignition Maker Edition yesterday, I've been thinking a lot about it. And while the goal is a platform for home automation and hobbyists, and for digital control specialists to hone their skills in their free time, I think this has huge implications for people who just want to learn to code. Now, there's plenty of resources and websites to help you get started with running your first lines of code, but they only really expose you to half the problem. Once you've gone through all the trouble of writing a program, then what? Very few people want to interact with the command line over a graphical user interface. And while it's cool to be able to load up trinket.io in a browser and immediately run some code, if you ever want to build something that you actually want to use, setting up your own development environment and getting everything running can be really daunting for someone without an IT background. And that's all just to say that while all those online tools are great, they also really limit the learner's engagement. It's just not that interesting to write a command line program these days. Once the learner can actually see, oh wow, I can actually build something here and make it instantly on my phone, and I can use it without having to open a command prompt on my laptop, that's huge. Now the learner is engaged on some kind of personal project that they can relate to and that they want to solve. And now that they're solving those problems, that's where real learning begins. Maybe I'm a bit biased because Ignition is basically where I learned to code, but recently there was a handful of people that I was talking to and they were learning to code for the first time. And I kept wishing that I could just show them Ignition and get them past all these hurdles of setting up a dev environment. But I thought, what's the point? Nobody's going to pay thousands of dollars to take their app out of trial mode. So I just wanted to show you just how quickly and easily we can get our own Ignition server running, which will allow us to run the designer, which is a kind of development portal for Ignition, and then take what we made in the designer and immediately deploy a web app. The first thing that we're going to do is go to inductiveautomation.com. The link should be in the description below. And actually do not click download Ignition. Go ahead and just click on the user icon first, because you'll have to set up a user account anyways. And go ahead and create a free account. Once you've logged in, you should see a page like this. And on the left, go ahead and click on Maker Edition. Below you'll see probably empty licenses. Go ahead and click download and select the version that applies to you. I'm doing this on Windows. So the thing that you need to know about Ignition is that it's a headless server. So this runs continuously on whatever computer you install it on, and it broadcasts itself on your local network, and you can access it from any computer on your local network and configure it from any point through a web browser or the designer application. So you don't actually have to be on the computer that it's installed on to be able to work with it. Once it's finished, go ahead and open it. Click Next, click Next. I'm going to do custom, but you can do typical if you want. It won't make any difference for what we're doing today if you select typical. Go ahead and click Finish once it's done. The first thing that it'll do is once it's finished running the installer, it'll open up a web page and it'll point it at localhost 8088, which means the computer that it's running on, port 8088. And here we want to select Maker Edition. We'll agree to their license agreement and click Next. And here from the previous user page on their website is where you will get your license and key that you'll copy and paste directly into here. Once you click Next, go ahead and delete admin as the username and create your own username and password. It's good practice to always set up a decent enough password. And you can leave those as default and go ahead and click Start Gateway. So now this is basically the landing page for all of the entire Ignition server. There's two main parts here, the designer and the projects that are running. If I click on the projects, there's nothing listed there. So I'm going to go and click on Launch a Designer. And here it'll bring me to the relevant download for my system, which is Windows. I'm going to click Save on that. And when that's finished, you can run it. Once it's open, we want to click on Add Designer, and here it did a pretty good job of saying, would you like to add applications from the gateway that we're on? And I'm going to say yes. And here you'll notice that it put in my IP address as the address to the server. Something that might happen to you is that on local home networks, unless you set up a static IP address for the computer that's running the Ignition server, this might change. So something that you might want to do instead is put in the computer name or the host name of whatever computer is running the Ignition software. And my host name actually is this right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and swap that out. So every time that the designer goes to look for my Ignition server on my home network, it's just going to look up the computer name rather than the IP address. If you're just running the designer on the computer that you're running the server, that probably won't make any difference at all. Now we want to create a new project. We want to give it a name. I'm going to call mine Home. You can leave the user source blank. We haven't set up a database yet. We'll use the default tag provider. And parent project is probably something that you don't need to worry about. That's if you have other projects and you have shared resources between them. And last part is a project template. So these are things that Inductive has made as pre-built starter applications. I personally like the WebNav application, but you can check them all out and see which one you like the best. So here we are in the designer. There's a few different sections that you'll get to learn the purposes of as you continue to learn the software. But for now, we're going to focus on the perspective module, which is the web server for our project. And here under home is the landing page for our project. And so if we go back to if we go back to our browser that's looking at our Ignition server, and we click on home, and we look at the projects, now we see the home project that we built, and just like that, we have a running website. I'm going to click agree on that, and we can see here. So if we go back to the designer and double click on home, this is going to show us the same page that we saw here. It's basically just this part. So now if we go back to our designer and double click on home, it'll take us to this page, home, which is what we see here. So the this left-hand window is called the project browser, which is how you navigate the different pieces of your project, and that's taken us into a section called views, into a folder called page, and this is a separate view called home that we're editing. And if I select one of these components on the screen, this section over here is called the property editor, and you can change different properties in here to affect what is shown. So of course here we can see the text property is currently this, and I can say welcome to my house. After making a change, I can save it, and it immediately deploys those changes to the web page. If you want to add additional things to the screen, this bar is called the Perspective Components palette, and it has a lot of different things that you can just use. And now I'm just going to show you how we can use just a few of these different components to work together and run some code and perform a task. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a subview for my home view. And so this view is going to be called sub home 1, and I'm going to leave it as a coordinate type, and you can leave this page unchecked because it's going to sit inside of an actual page, which is home. So I'm just going to leave it like that. So the first thing that I want to do on my home page is create a clock, and so I'm going to look in here for something that would be good for making a clock, and I'm going to use the LED display. And I want this LED display to be nice and big so I can see it clearly wherever I am or wherever this is running. Expand that out a little bit. And so with the LED display selected, I'm going to look at the value, and if we change this value, we can see it's reflected there. And on the left hand is where we can bind this value to something. And you'll learn more about binding as you learn the software, but I'm just going to click on this and go into expression. And so here we can configure an expression binding, and this can be a lot of things, but if you want to know more about what expressions are in Ignition, you can go to the help page by clicking help or just the F1 button, and this will take you to their documentation, which is really well maintained. This is running online and is updated all the time, and is a really good resource for figuring out how to do anything with lots of pretty good examples. And so I'm just going to scroll down to the left, and here, or I'm going to scroll down on the left, and here is an area called expression functions. And this gives us all of the basic types of functions that are used in expression language, in Ignition's expression language. And if you want to get some more basic information on how to use their expression language and the syntax, you can look at this link right here. So I'm just going to browse through here, and here is a date and time section, and I look at now. It says this function will return the current time, so that's what I want. And here's some nice little examples that they've given us. This returns the current time and it updates every second. Well, that sounds pretty good to me, so I'm going to copy that. And so now that we have that in there, it'll give us a preview of what it's going to spit out. So it's going to put out the full date and the time and PM. So I'll hit OK on that and see what happens. Well, it didn't like that. So I'm going to go back. And if we actually look at their example, they tell us what to do here. We can put this now function inside of a date format function, and it'll return how we want it. So I'm going to do that, and I want to know a little bit more about this date format. So I'm going to go back to the expressions functions, and I'm going to search for a date format. There it is. And here it breaks down all the different symbols that you can pass to the date format to get what you want out of it. And again, I'm just going to look down here at the bottom at the examples and look for something that looks like what I want. This looks good. I don't need the date, so I'm just going to grab this part. We'll go back here. We will replace what was in there before. And here we get what I want. And once I hit OK, we see we have something that looks like a real time. So now I want to see this show up in my home page. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to go back to home. There's a coordinate container in here that I'm just going to go ahead and delete out. In our components, I'm going to search for an embedded view, and so this will place an existing view inside of our other view. And with it selected under the path, I'm going to search for that subhome1 view that I created. And so there it is, we add that in, and when I click save, we can see there's our clock, but we notice that it's not updating. So I'm going to go back to our expression functions and look at the now function. And I can see that the only argument that it has is pull rate. And if you just do it with no argument at all, it should just return the current time every second. So let's go and fix that. So if I go back to my project, we want to go back to the subhome1 view. I want to select our clock again, and then I'm going to click this little link to edit the binding, and then just remove that 0 that was in there. That must have been a mistake or for something else. So I'm going to click save on that. And if we go back to our home page, here's our clock, and it's updating. So the next thing that I want to do is build a dice roll simulator. And so there's going to be a few different components that we want to use for that. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to grab a slider. Here it is. We'll make this guy pretty big. We can duplicate him so he's the same size, drag him down. And then we want to get some labels in there so we know what these guys are. So this first one is going to be number of dice, and make him big. And then I'm just going to edit his style real quick and make it so that he is center aligned. I'm going to copy him and paste that there. And so now we have the number of dice, and the other thing that we need is the number of sides on the dice. And then I'm just going to drag everything, and up here you have some different tools for aligning things that you have selected. So I want to align everything on the center. There we go. And then now we need to edit these two things. So the number of dice, well, we need to have at least one die, and then the maximum number of dice we will say is 10. And then I want to show the labels on there for the user, and the interval for the labels will be every 1. And so now we have a label and a marker at every interval that there is. The next one I'm going to do is there has to be at least one side, I guess. I don't know how you would have a one-sided die, but whatever. And we'll say we want to show the labels on him as well. And if we give it an interval of 1, it looks like there's enough space there for the user to use it. So now we have a slider for the dice and a slider for the number of sides. The last thing that we're going to do is create a button that will calculate for the user. Now we've got a button on there. I want to give the button some better text, so let's say yeet those dice. And last, we need a spot for the user to see what the actual output is going to be. I'm going to use an LED display again. Drag that up, make that nice and big. I want it to look a little bit different than my other guy, so I'm going to make him a 7-segment display, and obviously there's not going to be any decimals on the result, so I'm just going to put zeros there for the number format so it doesn't show decimal. So now we have all the components of what we need, and I'm going to rename all these things so that they make more sense, and I'm going to say this is the number of dice slider, and this is the number of sides slider. The labels we won't need to reference. This is probably going to be the only button on the screen. This we want to give it a better name, and we're going to call it dice output. Click save on that. So now we're going to actually write some code. So here with the button selected, I'm going to right click on it. And you might think that scripts would be the place to go. Not right now. The place that we actually want to go to is called events. And under events, they give you a whole lot of different options of things to trigger your event. And the event that we want is onClick. So when the user clicks the button is when we want it to do something. And here are the actions that we want to do. And what we want it to do is a script. So I'll click on that, give ourselves a little bit more room. And here is a bunch of information that that you can reference if you want. I don't think that we're going to actually reference anything out of it. So we can ignore all that for now, and we can start writing our code. So the first thing that we want to do is just get those values that were put into the slider by our user. And so I'm going to call this dnums for number of dice, and I'm going to set that equal. And up here on the right, I'm going to click on Browse Properties, and here it'll give me the different components and things that I can get properties from. So for this one, I want to get n dice and look in his properties, and I want to get his current value. And the next one I want to do is the sides, so the number of sides on the dice. And again, we're going to go to properties, and this time we're going to find the n side slider, look at his properties, grab the value from him. So let's just say, for example, we want to do a little bit of troubleshooting. We're not sure if we're getting the right value, something's wrong. Normally in Python, you could just say print dside, but there's a lot more going on here than just basic Python. So if you wanted to print something, what you have to do is type in system. And so what we're doing here is there's a whole bunch of different scripting functions that we can call, and the way that we reach those is first by putting in system, and if I push control spacebar, it'll give me some suggestions of what else can come up next, what different sections of scripts will come up next after that. So then I just want to grab perspective, and then I want to grab print. And then notice that we do have to put this inside of parentheses because it is a function. So let's just go ahead and try that real quick. I'll hit apply. I'm going to click on tools and click on console and drag him down to the bottom so that we can kind of see him a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and clear the console with that button so we only see new input. I'm going to put this view into preview mode and click the button. So here we can see 1. If we change these, we'll see the 13 here. So again, I'm going to right click on this button and click on configure events, and it'll bring us back to the event that we're looking at. So that's good. We know that that is working right. I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. And then the next section, the next thing that we're going to need is we need it to generate a random number. And so random is a standard library in Python, so we can go ahead and import that in. All the standard libraries in Python you can import and work. If you have another library that isn't part of the standard library, there's a whole other process in the documentation of how you add that into your server, which I'm not going to cover right now. So we've imported the random library. We need to total up all the different dice rolls, so I'm going to go ahead and set a variable called total to 0. And then we're going to just iterate through the number of dice that we're rolling. So I'm going to do a simple for loop and say for I in range, if I can type, we want to start at 0 and go to the number of dice that we have. And the reason why we want to start at 0 is because it'll actually stop when it reaches this higher limit. And so every time the dice rolls, we want to get a random number based on the number of sides. And so the way I'm going to do that is just do total plus equals to random dot rand int. And for this, we tell it the minimum the dice is going to be is 1, and the maximum it's going to be is the number of sides that it has, and that's all we got to do. And now we just need to take that total and give it an output. So I'm going to find my dice output, find its properties, go to value, and now we want to set it to something, and we want to set it to total. So I'm going to hit OK on that. Put my view back into preview mode. I can click that. It says D size is not defined. Because I called it decide. Fix that. There you go. Gives us the number. If we go down to, just one 6-sided die, you might notice a little bit of a problem that there's no feedback for when it rolls the same number twice. It just doesn't, you're not really sure if it did anything. So we want to add a little bit something in there so that the user knows something is happening when you click the button. So I can actually just hit Control J to open up the same window again. And I think normally in Python you could use wait. It's a bad idea to use wait in ignition. So the way that I'm going to do this, and maybe this isn't great, but it's just a really simple way to do it, is for I in range, I'm just going to have it go and basically do a for loop 500 times, which will probably take less than half a second. And I'm just going to set that output as nothing, so that the user sees it kind of disappears for a brief second before the new value comes in. So I'm just setting the value of the dice output to nothing. Oh, I in range. See, now there's a little bit of a blank spot every time the user clicks. And so now we can actually just go ahead and save this, and our home page is updated with the new information. We can drag those sliders and get new responses based on whatever our inputs are. So that's how you can get your Ignition server running, write some code, put some things on a screen, and have a full running web app in just a matter of minutes. This would only be accessible from when you're at home on your local network. If you wanted to see it outside of your local network, that's totally possible. There's a few more steps involved. I might make another video for that if that's something that you guys want to see. Let me know what you think of Ignition's new Maker Edition in the comments below. And if you want to see more Ignition related videos, click subscribe.